Hello and welcome back to Farming Simulator 22 on my test map on Elm Creek. Right, so I'm going to be revisiting a previous video that I did, which was about how to maximize your yield. I've done part 1 and part 2 of that, so technically this is part 3, but the reason I'm coming back to it is because of basically a picture that was released with a bit of information from the Farming Simulator Academy that just looked a little bit different, just slightly to what was in-game. So when you go into the help menu in-game, you go to improving yield, there's a lot of information there. It says that using a mulcher on stubble is 5%. If you go down to rolling, it also says that this is 5%. However, the picture that I will put up right now, so you can see. So as you can see, it says that fertilizing twice gives a plus 45% bonus. That's something that I already knew. Weeding 20%, which made me ask a few questions, which was, if you've ploughed and you've not got weeds, do you still get the bonus because you're not actually weeding? So there's a few little questions there that I wanted to answer. And liming 15% and ploughing 15% and mulching was 2.5% as well as rolling. So it's not 5%, it's 2.5% for each, which totals the 5%. So what I thought I'd do, because I want to answer a few more questions and get a bit of information on step by step what happens. So what I did was I did about 14 tests in total, and I staggered each step and see what the percentage increase was, and hopefully you'll find this information pretty useful. So what I just want to quickly point out is the equipment that I've used, just so you've got it as a reference. And the reason for that is I have calculated the amount of time that I spent from doing the most simplest harvest, or my base figures, and then my highest yield from all the possible additions you can do to maximize your yield. And by doing that, I could then work out the amount of pounds or dollars or euros, whatever you're using, doesn't really matter on that one. So I worked out the amount of pounds I'm earning from every minute I'm working in this field. Now you've got to remember, this is a small field. This is field 44, which I've done all the tests in. On pretty much all my crop tests, all my yield tests have been done in this field, just so we got that standard reference. Now it is difficult for me to tell you the actual size. It'd be good if I could tell you the hectare size in this field, but the problem is if I go to the menu here and try and pick it out, just because I have got the additional information, I can see that that's 0.95 hectares, but then again it's taken into account around the edge of the field, so it's not true. And the same for this is 2.6 hectares, but obviously this tiny little bit isn't that, so it is difficult for me to do that exactly. So I've always used field 44 for each one of these tests, and I've always started off in the same state as when you start the game. So it's had wheat in it. It's a bit different now because I've been doing canola. So it needs ploughing, it also needs lime, and that's the state that I always find the field in. So I always start from that point. But because of the fact that it might take you different amount of time with whatever equipment you've got, that you might have a smaller cultivator and on a bigger field, but all I wanted to try and do was give you a ballpoint figure so you could like have a look at it, get an idea of what the difference is in time that it took me, and then also I worked out a percentage increase in time. So let's get into it. Let me show you some of the figures. I'm not going to do any of the harvesting or any of the actual farming in this video. It's just going to be the final results and showing you what's what. So I'll first bring up the first screenshot that I took from my spreadsheet. Right, so now you can see I've got quite a lot of data in this. I've called it yield test. And from the left to right, you can see that it's telling you the information that I did canola in field 44. And they're all my tests on the left-hand side. So the first one was the base with periodic ploughing set to on and weeds on. So I've tried to make it easy to read. As you can see that I've put the colours in for if it's negative, I'm going to have a negative effect, it's in red. If it's going to have a positive effect, it's in green. And as you can see, it kind of goes in that kind of flow where it's obviously getting better down to the lower tests. So the first test that I did, the baseline one, like I said, it needed ploughing, it needed lime, it did have weeds, I didn't do any of the fertilising, I didn't weed, and I also didn't mulch or roll. All the action I took in that, which is I've tried to pinpoint it exactly the steps that I took, I cultivated and then I planted in canola, and I got a yield of 987. So that's my base yield. That's with the negative effects applied. Anything else from that is, to me, is going to be an increase, a percentage increase. And so what I decided to do from the test going from that point was take that as my base result, work out the percentage increase from that. I also tried to work out the expected from the information provided by the giants in the Farming Simulator Academy, and then I also put to the side the actual increase. So let's go through these one by one. So the next step that I did is I decided to do the exact same test, but with turning periodic ploughing and weeds off. Now, it was interesting to see that I actually got a 35% bonus, which is what you'd expect. That's the 20% from the weeds not being there, and then also the 15% from the ploughing not being required. So that made sense. 1,333 is my yield, and I used a deep cultivator and I planted on that. The next test I did was just for my own curiosity, because of the fact that I didn't want anything to affect these tests that I was doing. So I decided, because I needed to have weeds in the field, and every time I ploughed, it wasn't giving me any weeds, and I wanted to test if I used a weeder or herbicide, would it have effect? So I needed them weeds to be in the field, so I decided to start using a subsoiler in test 3. So the first thing I did then, just to rule out any difference in the actual state of the ground, is I thought I'd try out a shallow cultivator, which leaves a seed bed effect, but also a stubble tillage, depending on how the field is before. So with it being harvested, it left a stubble tillage, and what I decided to do was just check that there was no difference between my base result, which there wasn't. So I got 987 litres with a shallow cultivator, just like I did with the deep cultivator in the first test for my base result. So just to point out quickly, the only two ground textures that I saw was, I saw the cultivated state in my base one, I've seen a stubble tillage, and I've also seen a seed bed. Now, the only difference between them, it's not going to have any effect on the yield. All it's going to do, determine how fast your weeds grow back. That's all that's there for. Hence why if you plough, you get no weeds, because obviously that's the best one to do, but obviously it takes the longest. But if you do a shallow cultivator, it's going to be a lot quicker, but you're going to have more chance of weeds coming back. So with test 2, what I decided to do was use a plough instead of a cultivator. And the reason for this is because I knew weeds wouldn't grow back. So as you can see, it didn't need ploughing anymore. That's why I've put that in green and no. And did it have weeds? No, it didn't have weeds. So I expected to get a 35% bonus, like you would do if you turned off periodic ploughing and weeds off. And that's exactly what I got. I got a yield again matching the same result as if periodic ploughing and weeds was off, which is 1,333 litres. So that means that it's working perfectly. So if you do play with periodic ploughing on and off to try and match the same thing, which is what you'd expect, you do need to then obviously plough and make sure there's no weeds. If you use a subsoiler, you then need to take care of the weeds manually, but if you use a plough, weeds won't appear anyway, so you'll still get that 35% bonus, what someone else would be getting if they'd actually turned off periodic ploughing and weeds. So let's move to the test 3. Now this was subsoiling, so like I said, I used that just to determine if weeds are having an effect, because I'm obviously going to be subsoiling, I'm still going to have weeds in the field, so I'd expect to only have a 15% yield increase in this, because of the fact we are technically changing the state of the field, so it doesn't need ploughing anymore, but unfortunately the weeds are still going to be there. So I didn't take care of the weeds, I just subsoiled and then planted in canola, and I got exactly what I expected, which was a 15% increase. Well, I got 14.99 to be exact, but it's 15, and I got a yield of 1,135. So the next test that I did was I decided to do the exact same thing, but with a weeder. Now, I do want to point out first with the weeders, there are different types of techniques to get rid of your weeds. You've got a standard weeder that you can go across, and then there's also a second type of weeder that you can use it kind of digs deeper into the ground. I think they're a lot less wide than what the bigger weeders are, but the problem with them ones is I found that they only get rid of certain types of weeds. So even if you catch it in the first stage, when it's early, I found that some of the weeds weren't disappearing, but if I used the one that was, it looks like it digs deep in. I can't remember the exact name of it, but I will show it at the end of the video which one I was using. I'll make sure that I do that. That got rid of all the weeds, which is exactly what would happen if I used herbicide. So I used that kind of weeder. So I subsoiled, planted, and then I used a weeder, and I did get what I expected, which was a 35% increase, which was 1,333 litres again. So test 5, I moved on to lime. So it didn't need ploughing and it didn't need lime at this point. I also took care of the weeds. So my actions were subsoil, lime, plant, then a weeder, and I expected a 50% increase in yield, and I got exactly that, 1,481. So you can see that it is actually starting to match really well with what the information provided by the Farming Simulator Academy. It seems like they've got it spot on. So after that, I was really interested to find out about the herbicide, so using liquid herbicides, to see if there was a negative effect by using it. So I carried on with the exact same test that I did previously with lime. So I subsoiled, limed, then I planted, but then I used herbicide, liquid herbicide, and I wasn't sure what I was gonna get, but actually I got a 10% decrease from what I would got if I used a weeder. So if you use liquid herbicide, you're actually going to decrease your yield by 10%. That's what I found. So I got 39.92%, whereas previously, the same test, I got 50% increase. So it kind of went down by 10%. So it is good to keep in mind by using herbicide, you're going to actually have a negative effect on your crop. But obviously it's quicker as well to spray. So you need to balance it up there, what you think's worth it. So then I moved on to the fertilization test. Pretty straightforward. I did the exact same method that I've been doing previously, but what I did was I subsoiled, lined, plant, then I ferted, then I weeded, and I got 72.5% increase. And then I did the same again, but with 2 types of fertilization, and I got a 95% increase, which is what I'd expect. So pretty much test 7 and 8 are self-explanatory. So now I moved on to the mulching, and then after that to the rolling. The reason I did that is because this is the bit that I was a bit unsure about. Is it 5%? Is it 2.5%? So I kind of followed through step by step. There's a lot of things going on at this moment. So I'm mulching, then I'm subsoiling, then I put some lime on the ground, then I planted in my canola, then I fertilized, then I used a weeder, then I fertilized again. And I actually did get 2.5% increase. So I got a 97.5%. Which is a 2.5% increase from the previous test I did, which is good to see. So the yields are starting to go up. Now I was interested to find out once and for all, do you need to roll before? Do you need to roll after planting? Or does it have no effect either way? So the first test that I did in test 10 was I rolled before planting. So I followed the exact same steps that I did in the last test, but then I made sure that I rolled just before I planted in the canola, and I actually got the exact same result that I did with mulch. So at that point it looked like to me that it was having no effect if I rolled before planting. So in test 11 I wanted to prove that by rolling after planting. So I did the exact same steps, but the difference is when I was planting I rolled, then I did fert, then I used the weeder, and then I did fert again. And this time I actually got another 2.5% increase from when I was mulching. It's 100%. So I actually got a 100% increase from when I started off on my base testing, which means that instead of getting 987 litres from this field, I actually got 1,974 litres, which is a big jump. So I was happy about that. At least it proves that rolling after planting is the way to go. Mulching and rolling do both work, but they are 2.5% each instead of 5% each. So the last test, what I wanted to do was to test the bees out. Now the reason I did that is because you can do it on canola, and that's what I was trying out. That's what I've always tried out on Field 44 since I started doing these tests about maximising the yield on crop. So what I decided to do is just test it out. Now you can do this with canola, sunflowers and potatoes. Keep that in mind. So most crops you're only going to be able to get a maximum of 100% increase from your base result. However, you can get 105 if you're doing one of them 3 types of crop. So I did the exact same method I did in the last test, but I just put some beehives around. I actually had 2, one either side, and I did get the 105%. So my increase in yield was now up to 2,024 litres. So it does prove that everything is working the way it's supposed to be working. As long as you do follow the right method when it comes to rolling, make sure you roll after. Planting, don't use any liquid herbicide if you don't want to have that 10% decrease in the maximum yield you can get. But it was interesting to do all these different tests. It's actually made me finally realise which way to go about it. Now, what I will say, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of extra work, and you need to probably evaluate it yourself and decide if it's the right thing to do. For me personally, if I was playing a game the way I normally play it in my personal save games away from doing YouTube, I usually try to start off small and then build my farm into something bigger. So if I was starting off, for example, I'd probably just do a few of the extra increases because of the cost that it's going to incur on my farm, and then as I grow and get bigger and obviously got more money in the bank account, I can then invest into these pieces of equipment that are going to obviously invest into my yield, and I try and grow that way and then do these different add-on features inside the game later on, so like late game kind of features. That's the way I try and do it. But I do like the fact that Giants have obviously added in these extra gameplay features. So what I wanted to do next was just give you, like I said, a brief idea of the increase in time and how much I was earning per minute compared to the base test and obviously the final test in test 12. Now, test 12 and test 11 are exactly the same, but I had beehives with 12, so it didn't really take any time. Now, the way I did this is I had a timer and I set it going every time I was about to start in the field, so not going to get the equipment and then getting into position. I didn't take that into account. It was just the time that equipment was in the field. Now, obviously with the base, all I had to do was time me cultivating from start to finish and then me planting from start to finish. But in, let's say, test 12, for example, I had to do all the mulching, start to finish, subsoil, lime, plant, roll, FS1, weeder, FS2, and then harvest as well. So I did take into account the time it takes to harvest. So in the base, I got a yield of 987. Now, the best price I've witnessed on this map, which you've probably seen in my previous video, was 3,227 when it comes to canola. So I took that into account. So the income I would have got from the base was 3,185 if I sold that yield. Now, it took me a total of, it wasn't exactly 4 minutes. It was about 4 minutes and 3 seconds, but I tried to round it down or round it up depending on where I was. So I did it in 4 minutes. That's very quick, but again, it's a really small size field, so you need to scale this up to what you're doing. Again, it won't be exact because you might have different types of equipment. They might be smaller, they might be bigger, and then again, your field sizes will be different as well. So it's just a ballpoint kind of give you an idea of what to expect. So it took me 4 minutes, which worked out to be £796 per minute I was working. That's how much I was earning. So in test 12, I got 2,024 yield, which is obviously a lot more. Same price, the income shot up to 6,531, which is really good. If you're doing a field that's normally hitting £50,000 for canola, for example, you're not going to double it. You really are going to double it, and you're going to get like 100,000. So you need to keep that in mind. This is a small field, but if you're scaling this up to a bigger field, it might be worth it if you've got the equipment already, and if you don't mind the time that it's going to take extra. So all the field work that I did, including the harvesting, took a total of 10 and a half minutes, so 10 minutes and 30 seconds. I put 10.5 because that's the way I've been calculating it. And it worked out to be less income per minute, which you'd expect because obviously I'm putting a lot more time in and the price hasn't increased enough just to justify the same amount of time. But in my opinion, it has increased quite a bit for me to still say that it's going to pay off. So yes, it's effort. Yes, you put more time into it, but it's one of them things. It's good to have these extra options within the game. So it worked out for me that I was earning £622 a minute when doing all the field work that I could. So now I'm just going to show you some brief key points from what I learned from doing these tests. So yield increase works as suggested from the Farmer Simulator Academy. Using a plough stops weeds from growing. Liquid herbicide has a 10% penalty. Stones have a negative effect on your equipment maintenance but not on the yield. Mulching and rolling have a 2.5% bonus each, and you need to roll after planting for the 2.5% bonus. And my work time increased by 162.5% in test 12 to the base test. Right, so there we go, and that's all the information I've got, and I think, yeah, I'm definitely happy that I found it out because it's answered a few questions that maybe people have been throwing around. I have seen a few. So this is the weeder that I use. So if you can see these, they look like mini plows, basically, and they kind of go into the row. So your crop's supposed to go down this row. It's taking out all the weeds. It's kind of like pulling them out on that side. Imagine these rows. Now, it doesn't work with canola, obviously, but it's simulated that it would because you can see there is no rows. So if I just quickly go to the weeders, I'll show you the difference. So this one here is the one I use, and this one I found takes out all the weeds. But for example, if I used this one, which is a lot bigger, it didn't actually take out all the weeds. So keep that in mind. You probably want to do some tests yourself on that. You never know, I might do a video on weeding and how to get rid of your weeds and what each kind of weeder does. Actually, it might be really interesting to do that. So if I do, you'll see that on the channel. But yeah, there definitely is a difference between some of these weeders. They don't get rid of all the weeds together, and some get rid of just partial weeds. So hopefully you found the video useful. Hopefully you found this information good to you. If you have, please give the video a thumbs up. It really does help me out. And also, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more videos just like this one on Farming Simulator.